Ethan Cole had lived in silence for nearly a decade, his name forgotten by the world, his deeds sealed behind layers of redacted files and vanished reports, hidden in vaults beneath the Pentagon and buried under decades of national secrets. He wasn't supposed to be found. That was the agreement. After 20 years of service, 12 in the Navy SEALs, 6 as a Tier 1 sniper under the Black Ops Ghost program, and 2 more spent cleaning up missions so classified that even Congress couldn't legally be briefed, he was granted a final discharge that came with no parade, no medal ceremony, not even a thank you, just a firm handshake from General Langford and a promise, disappear, you've done enough. And so he did. Ethan moved to the high desert of Arizona, to a cabin, tucked into the edge of an abandoned mining trail, where the red dust covered everything and the sky stretched into silence. He didn't speak to neighbors, he didn't answer questions. The nearest town, a speck on the map called Ashridge, was 10 miles of rock away. Once every couple of weeks, Ethan would drive into town, pick up supplies, buy water, maybe a few cans of stew, and disappear again. He spoke only when necessary, moved quietly, always observing, always calculating habits that never left. His beard was scruffy, his eyes sunken, his hands calloused from chopping wood and fixing the truck himself. The locals had theories. Some thought he was a survivalist, others said ex-con. One woman swore he was a government agent gone rogue, but no one ever confronted him. There was something in his silence that made people step back, but all it took was one moment of misunderstanding to bring the entire weight of the nation's ignorance crashing down. On a scorching Thursday afternoon, Ethan pulled into town to buy diesel and bottled water. He parked his truck at the Chevron station at the edge of Ashridge, the one with flickering lights and a dusty vending machine. 2 young officers, Officer Dillon, fresh out of academy, and Officer Reyes, transferred from Phoenix and eager to make a name, sat in their patrol cruiser nearby, bored and restless. They saw Ethan step out of his truck with slow, purposeful movements, wearing a worn tactical backpack and desert boots that had seen better days. He looked around, not out of nervousness but instinct, the way a man scans for wind direction. Before making a shot, they saw it differently. "Guy looks twitchy," Reyes muttered. Dillon nodded. "Could be tweaker." Ethan walked into the gas station and disappeared into the back aisle where the bottled water was shelved. He moved methodically, grabbing only what he needed, but he lingered for a second, watching the mirror above the counter, noting the cashier's slow movements, clocking the exit routes, not because he feared anything, but because it had been ingrained into him to always calculate risk. From outside, it looked like loitering. Reyes radioed in a suspicious person inside store, and the 2 officers entered, hands close to their belts. "Sir," Dillon called out, "we need you to come to the front." Ethan looked at him blankly, slowly walked forward, and placed the water on the counter. "Got a name?" Reyes asked. Ethan didn't answer. "ID don't carry one," he said flatly. "That's a problem," Dillon replied, stepping closer. "Not buying anything," Ethan said, nodding at the water. The cashier stood frozen. She'd seen enough to know trouble when it started cooking. Reyes stepped around, trying to get behind Ethan. "Turn around. Hands where I can. See them?" Ethan didn't flinch. "Why?" "Because we said so." And that was it. Reyes moved fast. Dillon followed. They grabbed Ethan's arms, yanked him back roughly, slammed him against the freezer glass. He didn't resist, didn't even grunt. They cuffed him with unnecessary force and marched him out. The gas station's regulars and old rancher, a high school kid, a veteran in a faded army cap, watched in disbelief. The old man mumbled, "That ain't just any man," but no one listened. At the precinct, the officers processed Ethan like they would any uncooperative transient. They asked questions. He said little. No address, no phone, just his name. When they ran Ethan Cole through the database, the screen blinked red, classified, federal clearance required. No history, no mugshot, just a block of digital static. It was a message designed not for local eyes, but for agencies far above their pay grade. But the officers, unaware and arrogant, took the silence as non-cooperation, loitering, obstruction, possible mental illness. They wrote on the intake form. They tossed Ethan into a holding cell, metal door clanging shut, concrete walls, echoing the casual cruelty of bureaucracy. But that one alert, one flicker of red in a forgotten database had already triggered a chain reaction. A secure server in Arlington pinged. A program called Protocol Orion activated. A former SEAL named Ethan Cole had surfaced after 10 years of silence. Within 30 minutes, an encrypted message reached a secure device belonging to General Marcus Langford, now retired but still holding high-level intelligence clearances and command contacts. He had just finished breakfast when he saw the alert. He dropped his coffee. The name hit him like a bullet. Ethan wasn't just a soldier, he was Langford's finest. The ghost who volunteered for operations others turned down. The man who'd once infiltrated a rogue nuclear silo in northern Siberia with nothing but a suppressed rifle and a 10-day supply of oxygen. The sniper who held a ridge alone in Kandahar for 12 hours to protect an entire convoy of NATO forces. The only reason Ethan wasn't a national hero was because his missions were so secret. Acknowledging them would cause international incidents. Langford didn't hesitate. He contacted an old friend in Homeland Security. Where is he? Ashridge, Arizona, small-town precinct. What the hell is he doing there? No idea, but they have him in holding, cuffed. Jesus Christ. Langford was on a private jet within an hour. No aides, no press, no briefings, just a hard drive, full of sealed files and a fury that could break steel. Meanwhile, back at the Ashridge precinct, Officer Dillon was filing paperwork, still justifying the arrest. Officer Reyes was bragging to a dispatcher about catching a creep. Neither noticed the two unmarked black SUVs that pulled into the lot at noon, or the man who stepped out tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform pristine, his posture unmistakably military. General Langford didn't need backup. He entered alone. The desk sergeant, stunned, tried to stand. "Sir General, what brings you?" "Ethan Cole," Langford said. "Cell number?" "He's in 3, sir." But Langford didn't. White, he stormed through the hallway, officers scrambling aside like leaves in a wind tunnel. When he reached cell 3, he stopped. Ethan sat inside, wrists bruised from the cuffs, face unreadable. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition. Sorrow. A shared history forged in blood and silence. Langford turned to the stunned guard. "Open it now." The door creaked. Langford stepped in and removed the cuffs himself. No words, just a salute. Ethan nodded, slow and steady. Langford turned to the staff gathered behind him. "This man," he said coldly, "has done more for your safety than you will ever know. You owe him more than you can repay. Apologize, or I will make it official." And with that, the chapter ended not in gunfire, not in resistance, but in the raw cutting. Silence of justice, arriving too late. 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C. Beneath the quiet hum of a secure wing in the Pentagon, retired 4-star General Marcus Langford was reviewing classified intelligence updates when his encrypted handheld device vibrated softly. Single red notification pulsing on the screen like a heartbeat from the past. A name he hadn't heard in almost a decade. Ethan Cole, flagged and detained at a local precinct in Arizona. Civilian system pinged. Classified clearance override required, alerting all linked DOD protocols and events so rare it bypassed bureau chains and landed straight in Langford's hands, and in that moment, all oxygen seemed to vanish from the room. Langford stared at the name, blinking, almost unable to believe it. Memories surging like a torrent of firelit skies over Kandahar, of whispered reports from Black Ops Command, of sniper teams that operated in silence so that diplomats could talk in peace, of Ethan Cole, the quiet-eyed operator who never hesitated, never missed, who volunteered for missions that required more than bravery. They demanded complete emotional detachment and the willingness to vanish forever. And now, of all things, this man had been arrested by local cops on suspicion of loitering. Langford's jaw locked with cold fury, not the explosive rage of arrogance, but the contained, calculated kind, the kind that rewrites policies and ends careers. Without a word, he stood up, tapped the alert twice, sent an override request to Homeland Security, activated a ghost protocol, Orion Ascend, Tier 1 shield. Within 30 minutes, a secure Gulfstream jet was scrambled from Andrews Air Force Base, and Langford, now in full dress uniform that still bore the weight of war medals and campaigns the public never knew existed, boarded with a single attach case in his grip, one that held the original sealed files of Ethan Cole's most dangerous assignments. Missions so deeply buried that even the National Archives carried only shadows of them. The flight was fast, silent, and tense, the general seated like stone, reliving the day Ethan saved his convoy in Helmand, how the sniper had held a hostile ridge for 12 hours alone, with sand in his eyes and blood on his hands. The moment Langford had pinned a secret commendation onto Ethan's gear in a tent without witnesses, because recognition would have put Ethan and the entire program at risk. That man, that hero, had walked away with nothing more than a nod and a promise. "We'll protect your name if you disappear." And now, someone had broken that silent pact, By the time Langford's jet landed in a remote strip outside Ashridge, Arizona, Ethan had already been in custody for 5 hours, still handcuffed to a cold steel table in a bare interrogation room, where he'd barely spoken a word, his expression unreadable, his voice as flat as the desert air outside. The young officers who had brought him in, Reyes and Dillon, were rotating shifts, arguing over their interpretation of the law, justifying their decisions to the station supervisor while completely oblivious to the storm brewing above them. The moment Langford's SUV convoy arrived at the precinct, dust swirling behind it like a coming reckoning, the air in the small-town law enforcement building shifted. The receptionist blinked twice, staring at the 4-star insignia on Langford's shoulder as he marched in, boots thudding with such command presence that even civilians in the lobby stood up instinctively. "General Langford," the stunned sergeant stammered, unsure whether to salute or run. Langford didn't respond with greetings. He said, "Where is he, sir? If I may, this individual, where is he?" Not a question, a command. The officer pointed, and Langford brushed past the stunned staff, storming through hallways filled with peeling paint and fluorescent lights until he reached the reinforced door labeled Holding Cell 3. The guard standing by stiffened, hand halfway to his keyring. "Unlock it," Langford growled. The guard hesitated. "Sir, I'll need a warrant, son, if you don't open this door right now. The next uniform you wear will be for traffic duty in Alaska." That was all it took. The key twisted, the door creaked open, and Langford stepped inside. Ethan was sitting at the metal table, wrists bruised, fingers tapping slowly against the steel, not in distress, but rhythmically as if marking time. In a battlefield operation, their eyes met. Neither man smiled, no salutes, no handshakes. Just two men who had once fought wars no one else knew existed. Langford stepped forward, reached into his coat pocket, and produced a small military-grade lock override key, the kind only carried by Tier 1 command. With it, he unlocked Ethan's cuffs, tossed them onto the table, and stood there, breathing hard. "Chief Petty Officer Cole," Langford said quietly, "on behalf of the United States of America, I offer my deepest apology." Ethan blinked once, the slightest nod of acknowledgement, but didn't speak. Langford turned towards the officers clustered in the hallway, watching this unfold like a courtroom drama. "You didn't just arrest a man," Langford said, voice rising. "You arrested a national asset, one of the most lethal, loyal, and highly classified warriors this country has ever produced. And you did it because you didn't like how he looked." The station was dead silent. Dillon stammered. "Sir, we were just following protocol." "Your protocol needs rewriting," Langford snapped. "This man has more confirmed saves than you have parking tickets. He spent 20 years in the shadows so you could sleep safely in your homes." Officer Reyes swallowed hard. "We didn't know, you didn't ask. You saw a quiet man and assumed threat, not value. You treated him like a criminal because you couldn't recognize the sacrifice standing in front of you." Ethan remained quiet through it all, not because he couldn't speak, but because he didn't need to. Langford turned back to him. "You didn't deserve this," he said. "You've given everything. This is how they thank you." Still nothing from Ethan, but his eyes, clear and unblinking, held a storm inside them. A storm Langford knew well, the kind that never passed, only got quieter. Outside the cell, word spread fast. Within the hour, a Homeland Security liaison arrived to debrief the precinct. Cameras were confiscated, reports sealed. Every officer involved was placed under temporary review, but the damage had already been done. A bystander at the gas station had filmed the arrest. That blurry footage, uploaded anonymously, was already gathering momentum online. "Man arrested for buying water. Look what happens next." No one knew yet that the man in cuffs was a Navy sniper once tasked with eliminating global threats before breakfast. But the moment was already spiraling into the public consciousness. Langford knew they were out of time before media caught wind of who Ethan really was. Before the public could twist the story into politics or propaganda, Langford needed to act. He walked Ethan out of the cell, hand gently guiding the soldier like a father leading his son out of a nightmare. They exited the building together, past stunned officers who stood in awkward silence. Outside, the sun was setting behind the hills, casting long shadows across the precinct lot. A second SUV pulled forward. Inside it was a secure mobile unit designed for classified witness relocation, a feature Ethan was all too familiar with. As he stepped toward it, he paused. "Why now?" Ethan finally asked, his voice a low rasp. Langford exhaled. "Because you mattered more than they remembered." Ethan climbed into the SUV without another word. The door closed. The convoy turned and left. Back inside the precinct, Langford faced the remaining staff. "From this moment forward," he said, "no one speaks to the press. No one files anything without it passing through federal hands. And if I hear of one leak, I will ensure your careers end with dishonor. Am I clear?" They nodded, wordless. Langford returned to his aircraft that evening, but Ethan didn't. He was taken to a secure location for medical evaluation, psychological debrief, and full extraction back into the protected veteran registry, a hidden database reserved for men and women who could not be known but could never be forgotten. Meanwhile, across the country, social media roared. People debated, shouted, speculated, but none of them knew the truth. That somewhere in a concrete room, a ghost had returned to life, only to be reminded why he had chosen to disappear in the first place. Ethan Cole sat alone inside a high-security debrief facility just outside Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado, staring through a one-way mirror that reflected not his face, but decades of history carved into the lines beneath his eyes, the kind of age, not measured by time but by trauma, by hours spent behind a rifle in a foreign desert waiting for the moment when the wind aligned with fate, by friends lost in ops that never made the news, and by the quiet betrayal of a country that asked for silence, demanded sacrifice, and then forgot how to say thank you. The room was small, sterile, and far too quiet for a man who had spent years sleeping next to the sound of distant gunfire and encrypted radio chatter. A woman named Dr. Celeste Marin, a VA psych specialist and former trauma officer for Tier 1 operatives, watched him from the other side, taking notes, trying to read the unreadable. Ethan hadn't said much since being extracted from that Arizona precinct, not because he was bitter, but because words couldn't mend what was broken, not just in him, but in the system that created men like him, used them, then discarded them like burned maps. Outside the facility, the world had already begun to buzz with the viral footage of his arrest, blurred images of a man in cuffs, the sudden arrival of a decorated general, and the visible shock on the faces of local officers. News anchors speculated endlessly about the mystery veteran, but no one had the clearance to say who he really was, and yet, millions were moved by something they couldn't quite name, the sight of power apologizing to principle. Anonymous insiders leaked just enough to fuel the storm rumors of a black ops sniper arrested by mistake, a military cover-up, a retired general stepping in like an avenging angel, and, while Ethan's name remained redacted, his story had already become legend. A congressional oversight committee requested an investigation into how many Tier 1 veterans were living off-grid, unprotected, unacknowledged. Veterans groups rallied online, demanding reform, and somewhere deep in the Pentagon, General Langford was pulling strings, not to bury the incident, but to make sure it never happened again. Drafting a new protocol code Sentinella, safeguard for off-the-record operatives who had sacrificed anonymity for national security. Ensuring they were marked in every law enforcement system as priority shielded, an invisible layer of respect no rookie cop could override. Meanwhile, Ethan underwent psych evals, physical checks, and endless interviews with defense liaisons, but none of it touched the core of who he was. They wanted to know what he felt, but Ethan didn't operate in feelings, he operated in instincts, in consequence, in outcomes. When asked what hurt the most, he simply said, "I was never supposed to come back." And maybe that was the truth. For men like him, the only real retirement came in silence, in seclusion, in a forgotten cabin somewhere where no one asked what you'd done, only if you'd seen coyotes near the fence. But the world wasn't done with Ethan Cole. A week after his detainment, the president himself called a private session, not for a ceremony, not for a photo op, but to meet the man behind the mystery. They met in a secured bunker beneath Camp David, where Langford was already waiting. And when the president extended his hand, Ethan hesitated only a second before shaking it. "You've done more for this country than most will ever know," the president said, "and we owe you more than an apology." Ethan didn't ask for anything, but Langford did. He requested full reinstatement of all honors stripped due to classified status, lifetime protection under federal watch, and retroactive recognition for missions executed under silence. It was granted, quietly, without ceremony, just the way Ethan would have wanted. But something else happened too. News broke, leaked intentionally this time, of a new initiative being drafted by Congress, pushed by bipartisan forces, influenced heavily by a quiet letter sent from Langford's desk, and signed in black ink, for the warriors who gave everything and asked for nothing. Operation Sanctuary was born, a program to locate and protect former Tier 1 operatives lost in the margins of society, many suffering in silence, forgotten by the system they served. Ethan's case became the origin point, the face of a faceless force, not because he sought it, but because the story of his silence had awakened something ancient in the American conscience: respect for the unseen, for the men who bled in shadows. Back at the facility, Ethan was given an option to return to anonymity, or to join a quiet inner circle that would oversee Sanctuary's launch, helping others like him find peace, shelter, and dignity. He didn't answer immediately. For days, he walked the perimeter of the compound, alone, watching the sky change, the mountains breathe, the stars return. One evening, Langford visited him again, now out of uniform, just a man visiting another man. They sat on a bench outside the barracks, coffee between them, neither speaking for long minutes. Finally, Langford said, "You're not broken, Ethan. You were just never given a place to land." Ethan looked at him, voice low. "Maybe we were never meant to land." But even then, something softened in his tone. He agreed to help, for politics, not for glory, but for the handful of names he still remembered from his unit, the ones who disappeared harder than he had. Within weeks, Ethan was relocated to a classified rural facility in Montana, where he began working with a small team of psychologists and military liaisons, developing the framework for Sanctuary. No cameras, no spotlights, just results. Men started coming in: burned-out operators, deep-cover agents, former intel analysts who hadn't spoken to another human in years. Ethan greeted each one not with words, but with presence, and they responded, not because they knew who he was, but because they could feel that he understood. Meanwhile, the precinct in Ashridge faced internal review. Reyes and Dillon were both suspended pending federal training. The police chief resigned. A new policy swept across departments: nationwide mandatory awareness training on federal designations, with Ethan Cole's case used as the central case study, anonymized but undeniable. As for the video that sparked it all, it had now reached 47 million views. Comment sections were filled with outrage, sympathy, confusion, and reverence. No one knew his name, but they all knew his story. Some called him the Ghost Patriot, others, the silent hero. He never confirmed or denied either. Langford, nearing the end of his life, kept one picture on his desk: Ethan in civilian clothes, standing on the edge of a Montana ridge line, wind in his beard, looking not into the camera, but beyond it, as if watching something only he could see. When Langford passed 2 years later, his will instructed one simple thing: but Ethan be invited to speak at his private military farewell, held at Arlington under full honors. Ethan did attend, dressed in black, standing silently among generals and senators, unnoticed by most. But when his time came to speak, he walked to the podium, voice steady, clear. "General Langford once told me that silence wasn't just survival, was a form of service. I think now, it's time we learn how to listen to it." He stepped down without waiting for applause. Years passed, Sanctuary grew, and the legend of the arrested sniper who received a general's apology lived on. Not as a scandal, not as a mistake, but as a turning point, a moment when a forgotten warrior reminded a nation of its quietest debts. Ethan never returned to Arizona. The cabin was sold, the land left to nature, but those who knew where to look said he still walked the hills of Montana. Not with a rifle now, but with a journal, helping men like him write their way back to the world. And every so often, someone would stop by, ask his name, and he'd simply say, "I used to be somebody else. Now I just help ghosts find peace."